Hey guys, we made it to the second episode, yay! Thank you for your support. I'm still Darya, the host of the podcast The Neighbor Effect. This podcast explores how urban life influences us and how we in turn can shape it. During my travels, I speak with architects, community builders, urban advocates, and others to highlight inspiring stories from around the globe. Together, we uncover how individuals and groups create stronger, more connected neighborhoods and cities for better living. Today, on this episode, I'm meeting with Joe Linton in the heart of Koreatown in Los Angeles. Joe is the editor of Streetsblog Los Angeles and an advocate for many urban initiatives. You will hear about them during the episode. And now, I just want to thank you for listening. I hope this podcast will bring some new ideas to your life. If you find something in our discussion that interests you, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or our guests. All the links to our social media are always in the episode description. As a quick reminder, I'm still hosting urban therapy walks in different cities. We've already explored New York City, Austin, Los Angeles, Chiang Mai, and Bangkok. And if you're interested in learning more, follow us on Instagram for updates. There you will also find some behind-the-scenes moments from our podcast, including Joe's incredible city drawings. Now let's hear from Joe Linton. How are you doing, and can you tell a little bit about yourself?
I'm doing okay. My name is Joe Linton, and I'm the editor of Streetsblog Los Angeles. I have lived in Los Angeles for more than 3 decades without a car. That's something people, millions of people every day do, but few by choice. And I've done a lot of I work as a journalist, essentially, although Streetsblog is very much, doesn't attempt to be neutral. We're pro-bike, pro-walk, pro-transit. And prior to this, I did a lot of urban environmental activism. I was one of the founders of the LA County Bicycle Coalition. It's now renamed Bike L.A. I worked for Friends of the LA River, did a lot of work to try to get natural areas and bike paths and whatnot along LA's river, which is pretty neglected. And I actually worked on the first CicLAvia, the event where LA closes down streets, called the Open Streets event. That's very popular now and stuff. So, and then for the last decade, I've been covering stories of, livable Los Angeles as the editor and writer of Los Angeles Streetsblog.
Amazing. So many initiatives and organizations. I read this fact about you living without a car. And can you please tell me about it? Why did you choose it? And what is your experience? Because I'm here also without a car. I don't know. I just decided not to think about it and try to see how I can manage it without a car.
LA is a big, sprawling city, and there's big parts of LA where it's really difficult to live without a car. But the central parts of LA, the old streetcar suburbs, there's rail lines that are under the sidewalk that you probably walked over to get here. So these areas were built around transit, and as much as we've tried to turn our back on that, there's still enough infrastructure and enough walkability and enough transit service that it's totally possible. And I combine bike and transit a lot. I go, to get to the west side, I bike a mile, I hop on a bus for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then I, bike a couple miles at the other end of the trip. So it takes a little bit of planning ahead, but it's not impossible. And there's 1 million people, actually 1 million boarding, so probably 500,000 plus, that use Metro every day. So it's not the most common way to get around LA, but it's not really unusual, especially in central parts of Los Angeles, for many people to exist without a car. So in the 80s, I got interested in sort of environmentalism, and I felt like a lot of people were sort of save the rainforest and save the desert, and I felt like what interested me about environmentalism was how do we live our lives in ways that are in touch with nature and are supportive of the environment. And so that led me to reading about the huge, destructive impact of driving and the oil and the way the air quality, the water quality, there's all kinds of awful impacts. And so as someone interested in the environment and interested in how the way I live my life impacts the environment, that got me interested in trying to live without a car. I started to bicycle a lot. I started to take transit. I figured out how to get to my work without, I could bike or I could take transit to my work. And I had a car, and then I started to use it less and less. And then the Gulf War hit in 1991, and I decided that I had already been, I had a car and I had used it for, I think I drove like 1,100 miles in a year. and I just decided that it was time to, it's sort of as a symbolic gesture, whatever, as a commitment on my behalf to get rid of my car. So I haven't had a car since 1991. I'm married. My wife does have a car, so we have a daughter. So we do have a 3-person household with one car. I think if people are concerned about global warming, if people are concerned about the environment, if people are concerned about quality of life in cities, it's important to not have driving be your sort of default choice for every trip. But it's not, I don't think you lose your environmentalist card for occasionally renting a car or driving a car.
30 plus years, it's huge. It's really, really cool. Do you know any people who were inspired by your example and started using their car less, for example?
Yeah, I think I used to do so. People will do fundraisers. People will say like, "Oh, I'm doing a walkathon to raise money for breast cancer, and will you sponsor me?" And I would tell people. I told a friend once, I'll contribute $10 if you take the bus to work one day. Nice. I'll do 20. And she took the bus to work, and she realized she worked in downtown LA and she lived in Burbank. That it was one bus to get to her job, and it was easy and it was air conditioned. And so I think, I've encouraged a lot of folks to give transit a try, to give bicycling a try. I think it's not as hard as people think. You're not taking your life in your hands to bike in LA, but at the same time, it's not easy or convenient for a lot of trips.
Speaking about Streetsblog, can you please introduce this blog and what is your mission?
Yeah, so Streetsblog is almost 20 years old. It's actually a national network of websites. It started in New York City and includes Boston and Chicago and San Francisco and Los Angeles. I'm one of 2 editors for Streetsblog Los Angeles, and I write a daily story pretty much about walking, bicycling, transit, parking, cars, freeways in LA. Some of those are, I went to a new bus stop and here's some photos, or so some of them are pretty shallow. But I track a lot of issues, especially Metro is the county-wide transportation agency that does a lot of transportation stuff, but that runs the bus service and the rail service, and also expands freeways. So I think folks at Metro would say that I'm a critic of them, and I am a critic of a lot of things that they do, but I think I've always tried to praise things that I think they're doing that are important for the future of Los Angeles, while being critical of things that I wish they weren't doing. So there's also a lot of, so Metro's a county agency, there's also the city, there's 88 underlying cities in the county, and state issues overlap, like freeways are state jurisdiction. So there's a lot to track, and I feel like I have a good grasp of LA City and of Metro, I think. I mean, I miss things there, but there's a lot going on from Santa Monica to Pasadena to Long Beach that I report on occasionally, but don't always get to.
Writing daily is huge work. How do you gather your news? Is it always you who go there and see and writing, or maybe people also?
And I should say we do have a team of, we have Sarah Suleiman, our communities editor, covers issues for predominantly Black and Latino communities. We have a reporter part-time who's Chris Greenspan, who's covers the San Gabriel Valley. So I think most of the stories, and I don't think most of the stories that appear at the website are for me, but I'm not the only person carrying the load. We get guest stories, we syndicate stories from other cities and stuff sometimes. So, but yeah, at this point, I mean, I track what's going on in terms of, Metro issues, Metro meetings. I track a lot of what the city of LA does in terms of repaving streets and adding bike lanes and bus lanes and whatnot. So I track a lot of LA City and LA Metro County meetings, and I have a network of friends and sources who say, "Hey, Joe, did you hear about La Brea bus lanes or whatever?" So at this point, people come to me with stories if I haven't found them myself.
Do you somehow interact with your readers? Do you try to involve them maybe to some activities, initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, I think some. Since the pandemic, there hasn't been. I mean, we used to hold like awards dinners and socials and speakers occasionally, which we haven't done. So I don't interact in person as much since the pandemic. But there's. As I answer this, I think it's a little wimpy, my interactions with readers. I mean, I definitely get emails from folks and comments and interactions on social media and, friends who are involved in these issues who say, "Oh, I was really glad you wrote about the Vermont bus lanes," or whatever, or something. But or say, "You need to cover Culver City better," or something, whatever. I get complaints and praise. It's a lot of sort of informal interaction. And I think it's, as someone who was involved in CicLAvia and the Bike Coalition, and Friends LA River, I sort of have had networks of contacts with, people involved in, community organizations, nonprofits, in different parts of LA. So I definitely have contacts. I mean, I feel like I did come out of sort of the bike community, which is somewhat organized and somewhat chaotic, but there's definitely a lot of social and, you know, grassroots organizing kind of contacts within that context. And then as I've covered, I feel like I started as the bike guy and I've become sort of the freeway, the anti-freeway guy. So I've been covering a lot of, you know, efforts where Metro and Caltrans will, you know, tear down hundreds of houses in communities to expand freeways and, you know, induce more travel and more pollution. And so that's been, I feel like I've gotten more and more up to speed on those issues of impacts of freeway expansion in Los Angeles, which people think, oh, that happened decades ago, but it's happening right now. And some of the worst of it's perhaps not happening, but the freeway expansion era in Southern California has not ended by any stretch.
Can you tell a little bit about some other organizations and initiatives that you are involved in? You mentioned Bicycle Coalition, Friends of LA River. I know that LA River is the big part of your life, as I saw on your website of Streetsblog. Can you tell a little bit about what do you do there?
So LA River, I used to be really involved. I used to be the river guy, maybe, but one of the river guys, one of the river people, and I helped organize cleanups and pushed for restoration projects and parks and bike paths and whatnot along the river. I worked for Friends of the LA River and raised funds for our work, and I did a lot of sort of on the ground experience stuff, which is to say I led walks and some bike rides. I used to lead a monthly walk along the river, and I would go and scout out, and so I would learn a lot of places, and I would often get a guest speaker to speak about issues in that area. So I made a lot of contact with local folks, and the founder of Friends of the River, a guy named Louis McAdams, who passed away a year or two ago, he always said that you should get people. When people asked him, how should I get involved? He would always say, go down to the river and see it and see how you respond to it and what it says to you. So part of my mission as in my river activism was to bring people to the river on a regular monthly basis. And that was actually inspired by a thing called Critical Mass, a monthly bike ride that a lot of LA bicyclists got to know each other and actually led to the founding of the LA County Bicycle Coalition. So I wrote a book about the LA River, a guidebook called Down by the Los Angeles River. I wrote a blog called LA Creek Freak with a couple other folks. The river is an awesomely, like a city, is very complex in that a lot of folks view it as sort of a single purpose thing. A lot of engineers see it as only in terms of flood protection, and yet it's also habitat and recreation and transportation and so it's sort of a multifaceted system that hadn't been treated as such. And I think streets are analogous, that we in America have largely through traffic engineering profession have seen streets as sort of single purpose, get as many cars through as fast as possible, and that we're gradually, I wish we were further along, and that I think we're gradually seeing that they are public spaces that serve a myriad of purposes, and that we need to design them and treat them as such, and not. So I think one of the things people used to ask me, like, what was the thing most needed for a healthier LA River, and I would always say, like, the end of single purpose thinking, whatever that I think when we approach almost anything in the urban environment, and we say this piece of property, it can only be a park, it can only be a school, it can only be a housing. I think we're often wrong, that we need to look at communities have big needs in many directions, and where we can share space and fulfill multiple roles, where a street can filter stormwater and encourage bicycling and multiple things. I think we get we get a sustainable city, and a city where people sort of come together better than when we treat everything as sort of single purpose amenities. It's just a word I don't like. Single purpose facilities.
Wow.
Anyways.
Interesting perspective.
The next group I'll talk about briefly is CicLAvia. So folks here were inspired by Bogota, Colombia closes 80 miles of streets every Sunday, and people walk and bike, and so some neighbors of mine here at Eco Village, which I'll talk about if you want, got inspired by that and wanted to bring that to LA, and other cities, Portland and San Francisco and New York, in other United States cities had sort of copied some of these Latin American examples. It's done in Guadalajara and Mexico City and many cities throughout the world that I don't even have a good list. Anyways, but Bogota Colombia is the sort of poster child for these open streets events. So in 2010, LA hosted the first CicLAvia, closed 7 miles of streets, and roughly 100,000 people showed up. I was worried.
Wow.
I helped organize the volunteers, that we knocked on the doors of all the businesses and residences along those streets and let people know that their street was going to be closed for a day and that they should come out and enjoy it. And some of them were mad and some of them were excited. Anyway, so I didn't start CicLAvia, but I worked. I was sort of the volunteer coordinator and social media and bike liaison person for the first few events, and it's still going strong. There's about 10 events a year now, and I love to go on them with my daughter. There's a lot of I'm worried, like you sort of asked about like community groups, and there's a lot of groups that bring a lot of expertise and energy to a lot of efforts in Los Angeles, and issue-based groups, but also sort of area-based groups, neighborhoods, and anyways, I feel like if I start naming the ones that I don't know.
You also mentioned that you fundraise sometimes for some organizations. How do you usually do this?
I don't feel like I'm a great fundraiser. There's a mix of seeking small donations, which are great for their flexibility. Often groups are dependent on a few big donors. I've written grants. Often there's events like awards dinners where you get interested parties to sponsor the events. I mean, I don't do a lot of fundraising right now. I feel that Streetsblog has my boss, Damien, is sort of the administrator of the California Streetsblogs, and he's whatever. I occasionally pitch in on like reviewing stuff, and I get the word out on encouraging people to donate. But I don't do a lot of fundraising.
Are there any cities that inspire you in terms of urban initiatives, pedestrian initiatives, transit initiatives?
I mean, I've had the fortune of traveling to places that I've been impressed by, and I've written about those occasionally at Streetsblog. I mean, Mexico City is awesome, and getting around, like they have open streets on Sundays. They have a lot of issues with pollution and whatnot, but they have really strong bus and rail systems, and I learned a lot from trips to London, to Barcelona, to some cities in Italy.
Can you mention something that you enjoyed the most?
Well, I think Barcelona. I spent a week in Barcelona, and there are these Ramblas, these streets that are the center of the street is a big wide area for pedestrians, sometimes for bicyclists, and it's something I never thought would work in Los Angeles, to sort of put the walking area in the middle. But when you have 30, 40 feet of pedestrian area in the middle of the street and two little lanes for cars at the margin, you get an area dominated by walking. Yeah, I think Barcelona is really a dense city that has a lot of transit, a lot of bicycle, and and the foundation is like lots of walking. I think for me too, part of there, occasionally I go to a city and am in a car a lot of the time, and I feel like I haven't really learned that city, and then I get a chance to get on a bicycle or get on transit or walk around, and that's when I really feel like, oh, I get how this city works, or this is whatever, here's the problem, or here's the actually Washington DC I visited for the first time last year, and walked everywhere and took transit some, and whatever. It's always it's interesting what experiments, what forms are tried, and how big, like Washington DC has big spaces that are pretty active. Whatever. I feel like in Los Angeles, things like Griffith Park are well loved, but gently used in a way, because it's sort of a lot of hillside, a lot of inaccessible, it's like a big thing in a city that's not heavily used, and it is, parts of it are really heavily used. I think that in some ways white Americans are not very good at public space. I think our traditions are sort of, in my generation, are sort of like nuclear families and suburban, and it's not 100%, and I think that immigrants, especially from Asia and from Latin America, are much more comfortable in public spaces, and are sort of teaching that to white America. And I feel like I feel like African Americans are better at public space than white Americans are. Anyways, I feel like there's a bunch of sort of dynamics, and none of them apply across the board. It's probably too broad brush, but I think that Los Angeles, things like CicLAvia, learning from Latin American practices and Latin American cities is critical for the future of Los Angeles. And I think that even investing in. I mean, there's a sense that this is from LA River work, but it's also true for some transportation stuff. Is that and these are really broad brush, and probably if somebody looks at these studies, I'll be wrong. But when there's bonds on our elections, when voters are asked to fund public parks and public schools and public transportation, white voters, there are definitely people who do support those, but those measures often fail in older, whiter communities, and pass strongly in Black, Latino, and Asian communities. And so I feel like there is an immigrant tradition, and beyond that, of sort of investing in these shared public institutions and public spaces in Los Angeles, and I think that gives me hope for the future of Los Angeles.
Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. You shared a lot of things, and I already want to Google everything and dive deeper to these initiatives that you mentioned. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hey guys, thank you for listening. Please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Feel free to reach out if you'd like to share your thoughts or suggestions. We'd love to hear from you. In the next few episodes, we'll be heading to Thailand to speak with changemakers there, so don't forget to subscribe. See you soon!